Hey guys, before we start the If I Could Only Have One, I wanted to say real quickly, I made a huge mistake in this video. The majority of it was shot with an aftermarket trigger in the Glock 26. However, as you can see, the stock one is in here, and for the trigger comparison, I use a bone stock trigger, and the shooting was also all done bone stock. So just wanted to make sure that that was clear before we start. Let's get on with the show. What's up guys, KS here. Thanks for joining me today as always. Welcome back to another edition of the If I Could Only Have One series, where we take a look at two guns, whether similar or in some cases very different, and put them head to head. We'll check out specs, features, shooting, and at the end, there will be a winner. But as always, both of these guns are awesome. If you're thinking about picking either up, or you've already done it, you're doing great. It's just a chance for us to challenge each other to say, if I could only have one, which one would it be? Today's lineup features the ever-popular Glock 26 versus the new kid on the block, the CZ P-10S. A little history on me with the Glock 26. Years ago, I was a devoted fan, shooting and carrying it often. I found it to be very shootable, yet capable of deep concealment. Over the last year or so, I fell out of favor with it, opting for larger subcompacts that seemed to be more enjoyable to shoot. In recent months, however, I've rekindled that relationship, and I'm glad I did. More on that as we move along. As for the P-10S, I was uber excited to see the smaller P-10 in action. I've been a huge fan of the compact, finding it to be both ergonomic and very shootable. The P-10S shares many of the same characteristics, yet throwing in a few new tricks to up the game. Now it's time to throw these subcompacts in the ring to see which one takes home the title. Let's jump in. All right, let's do a quick side-by-side between the two. It's one of my favorite parts about doing this, really seeing these guys up close and personal to each other. And I really enjoyed the subcompact genre, largely because you're still getting pretty good capacity, 10 rounds or better, but certainly very concealable. Now these guys are about as lined up as they're going to get from each other. That P-10S on the bottom is definitely going to be a little bit longer, 6.6 inches versus the 6.42 inches on the Glock 26. And then in terms of height, once again, definitely a difference. Hard to line these two guys up just right. But the height's going to be 4.6 inches on the P-10S versus 4.17 inches on the Glock 26. Now the barrel length between the two, 3.5 inches versus 3.43 inches, that's pretty negligible. And the width also is very similar, 1.25 inches on the CZ, I'll try and line these guys up as best I can, versus the 1.2 inches on the Glock 26. So again, not a lot of difference there. However, in terms of weight, we definitely do have a pretty good difference here. We've got 24.4 ounces versus 21.52 ounces. So, you know, when ounces matter, perhaps the Glock might have a little bit of an advantage there. But again, both of these guys are certainly subcompact and fit that bill pretty well. All right, let's walk around the frame of the P-10S for a moment or two. We always start with our grip texture, of course, and they carried forward the grip texture from the P-10C. I actually really enjoy this texture quite a bit. I think it's got enough bite, even though some people said it was overly aggressive. I really don't think so. I like the fact that it's got some somewhat sharp pyramids on your front and back straps and a little bit more subdued squares on your side panels. And then we do have changeable back straps as well, allowing for a little bit more modularity, so you can really kind of dial it in to fit your needs. And then we do have an indent at the bottom, so it's a little bit easier to strip out magazines if for some reason you have a malfunction. Now, speaking of magazines, these do usually come with a couple of 12-round magazines. They're good construction. I like these quite a bit. Now, these are a newer style, so if you have an old P-10C, older magazines, they will not work with the new models, whether it's the S, the P-10, or the F, of course, a little bit too long, but just something to consider. So they've actually redesigned these. There's a second cutout right here. And we'll get to why here in just a moment. But there are some other options as well. You can also go with your 12-round magazine with a +2 base plate on it, or bumper, whatever you want to call it. So when you get that in there, it does allow for a full grip, which is really nice. The one thing that's a little bit odd about it, you'll notice that it actually juts back forward a little bit. Now, that gives you a little more leverage, I will say. However, for some reason on this one, I don't find it to be quite as comfortable as I would like. So it's certainly usable, not too big of a deal, but it kind of presses my pinky in an odd way, I guess. It's hard to describe that. But then, just like the Glocks, here's our P-10F 19-round magazine. That is a great carry option right there. So you do have some really good magazine interchangeability, flexibility, whatever you want to call it, which is really nice. Now, we are going to stick with our flat magazine for the rest of this. And as we move up on the frame, of course, it smooths out a little bit, really nice contours. Now, one thing about the P-10s that I've noticed, all of them, including the F, the contour back here, you're not really a beaver tail, but just the very back of the grip, I noticed that it really kind of thumps my my thumb knuckle right here a little bit, and that's always been the case. I mean, the P-10C was one of the first things I noticed. If you go back to that original video, it's not the end of the world. It's a little bit uncomfortable, but I can get past it. That's fine. However, again, just not quite ideal. And then there is a little bit of an undercut under your trigger guard as well. So overall, I think they've done a pretty good job with this. I would like to see them sculpt this a little bit better. Of course, we do have a pin right here, so that might not be an option for us. But one of the changes that they made to the P-10S and the entire P-10 line, if you recall, they used to have ambi magazine releases. That is no longer the case. Now it's swappable, so you can change it around, but they made it a whole lot easier to eject magazines. I'm doing this weak hand, and it's not an issue at all. So a lot better for ease of use. However, they did keep the ambi slide stop slide release. Now I find this to be a little bit stiff, just like the original P-10 was. That tends to wear in over time. So spend some time with this, do a lot of slide releases using this, and that will definitely work its way in. Now you'll see there's a little bit more texture as we move up on the frame. I love this. I think that's a great attention to detail. It's a great feature on guns. So it gives you a little bit of a reference point. And also I just think it kind of looks cool. And then you'll notice we do have an accessory rail for all of your toys, whatever you like on there, and a little bit of texture on the front of the trigger guard if you like to use that as a reference as well. So by and large, I think they've done a pretty good job with this. Now, in terms of takedown, it's very similar to a Glock. We've got our two tabs. You do have to pull your trigger, pull the slide back just a little bit, and then it'll pop off. You guys know I don't take them apart in these videos. Go back to the original video if you want to know how to do that. It is definitely out there. But again, otherwise, there's your frame on the P-10S. And by and large, I think they've done a good job with this. All right, we'll take a look at the Glock 26 for a moment or two. And in terms of texture, our Gen 4 or even Gen 5 texture, actually I find to be very good. We've got some subdued squares on your side panels, and then on your rear and your front, slightly more accentuated pyramids, although not quite as aggressive or bitey as the P-10S. Now we do have a modular backstrap system. This is actually the first time I've used the backstraps, and it helped immensely on the 26. I'm so glad I finally did this. So it allows for, again, a little bit more modularity there. But in terms of finger grooves, we have them on this. Now, Gen 5s are absent of the finger grooves. That's one of the reasons why I went with the Gen 4. So even though I've only got a very two-finger grip on it, those grooves and that texture allows this gun to stay very planted in hand, not too big of an issue. Now, I'm going to bring the P-10S back for a minute because I forgot to mention one thing. The grip on this, it's about 2.5, 2 3/4 with the flat magazine. So you definitely do get a little bit more grip on this. Keep in mind, 12 rounds with the P-10S versus 10 rounds, which we'll look at here, on the Glock 26. So we've got our standard flat 10-round magazine, but definitely some flexibility with the Glock. We've got our 12-round magazine, just a factory +2 right here. I love this. I mean, it's a full 3-finger grip, still very concealable. It doesn't add a lot to it, but 2 more rounds, which is great, although not native out of the box. But one thing Glock has going for it is the magazine interchangeability. Whether a 15-round or this 17-round magazine, this is a phenomenal backup option. I like that quite a bit. But of course, nobody can forget the 33-round fun stick right here. Man, this is a rig, I gotta tell you. But it just allows, again, for a lot of flexibility in terms of the Glock. Now when we get to controls, our magazine release, once again, is not ambi out of the box. However, very easy to swap. So you do have that flexibility there. However, the slide stop slide release, unlike the CZ, is not ambi out of the box. So that might be a deterrent for some people, but a lot of people really kind of gotten used to this. So I don't really consider it that big of a deal. And of course, I'm right-handed, so not a big deal to me necessarily. Now, there's no real texture as far as any sort of a little call out here for reference or anything like that. Just a little bit of a hump. I actually use that as a reference. It's fine. However, the Glock 26 is absent of any accessory rails. So if you're going to hang any toys off of it, you've got to do it from the front of the trigger guard. So then there are definitely some options there. There is a little bit of texture right there, by the way, just in case you're curious. So the frame on the 26 definitely is doing it different. The takedown's very similar to the CZ, of course. So you've got your 2 takedown tabs on both sides. I've got detailed videos out there on that as well. But again, the frame on the Glock 26 doing it a little different, but definitely very usable. The slide on the CZ P-10S has a lot going on, and right off the bat, one of the things you'll notice is the front and rear serrations. They are deep and they definitely work. There is no doubt about that at all. So if you're into press checks or anything, that's great. I also think it just breaks up the slide. And then they've done a little bit of mill work up here as well. Again, breaking up that slide a little bit more. I think it's actually a really attractive gun, if nothing else. Now, one thing you notice right off the bat is the fact that this particular one is optics ready. All of the P-10s in 2009 have an optic and a non-optic version. Now, at this point in time, the base plates for these are not quite like a Glock MOS. You only have options for the Trijicon RMR or the Leopold Delta Point Pro. There may be more options in the future, however, I'm not sure, so don't hold me to that, but still a really good option as well. Now, in terms of sights, I did go with the front HD night sight, and I'll tell you what, the HD call out in this is great. It's probably not quite as good as maybe an Ameriglow or a Trijicon, but still pretty darn good. And then our back rear is not serrated. They are night sights, however. I didn't find glare to really be much of an issue with this, and the range is a great litmus test for that, as you guys know, because it's so bright there. And there is a tiny bit of a shelf for one-handed manipulations. Although it's a little bit slanted, I still think you could probably make that work. So again, a lot going on with the slide. The fact that there is an optics capability, I think a lot of people are really going to enjoy that if you're into optics. So again, a lot going on with the P-10S. I think there's some really great welcome upgrades. Now, the slide on the Glock 26 is probably not quite as exciting as the P-10S. We don't have any front serrations here. It's kind of the same as it ever was on this, and even the Gen 5 doesn't have front serrations. Perhaps we'll see something in the future on that. We just have our rear. They are certainly very usable. Not too big of a deal there at all, and I know a lot of people do some custom milling on this, but the fact is it doesn't have it out of the box. To some, it's really not too big of a deal. I'd like to see it in the future, however. Now, you'll notice no optics on this, and I don't believe there's an MOS, at least not at the time of this filming. So perhaps they'll do something like that down the road. We shall see. Now, a lot of people, of course, will mill them out for an RMR. That's always an option, but again, not out of the box. Now, in terms of sights, typically these do come with polymer sights. I can't stand the polymer sights. That's always a ding on Glock. So I actually went with some Ameriglow sights. Just the front sight, it's HD and it's a night sight, and then rear serrated sights. I think this is a great sight lineup. I've really actually enjoyed this quite a bit. It helps me focus on that front sight alone and get the job done without question. But again, something very different on the Glock 26. A lot of people would say that it's not quite as exciting, but it is still very usable for sure. The shooting experience with the Glock 26 has been very inconsistent for me of late. Since being introduced to such options as the HK VP9 SK, going back to the smaller 26 became a chore. Keeping that in mind, I devoted some serious time to the G26 recently and have dramatically changed my opinion. Although there's not much gripping surface to work with using a flat base magazine, the grip texture and finger grooves on the Gen 4 help keep the gun planted in hand. Add an extended mag and it becomes an all-day shooter. The 26 handles recoil well, though you do sacrifice some recoil reduction since it's both smaller and lighter. That said, keeping sights on target is easy and the 26 is remarkably accurate. I'll say it again, it's a great balance between very concealable and very shootable. The CZ P-10S takes a different approach to the subcompact genre. It's bigger all the way around, which means to some it may be more shootable, absorbing more recoil and giving the user more gripping surface. The longer grip also accommodates 2 more native rounds than the G26. There's a sacrifice though. Many will argue that the P-10S gives up some concealability. I agree, though let's face it, it's still small and very carryable. The new night sights with the enlarged HD front callout are awesome and a great upgrade out of the box. I found the P-10 to be accurate and capable of putting rounds exactly where you want. That said, I occasionally struggle to find the sweet spot in terms of grip, which translated into loose groups. That's mostly a training issue and hopefully will be resolved soon. Alright, let's take a look at the P-10S trigger for a moment or two. Now, it is a safety lever design right here, and the safety lever actually is pretty darn flat. It actually disappears within the face of the trigger. I like that quite a bit. And it's not quite flat. There's a little bit of a curve there, although it's not bad at all. But when we actually work the trigger, we do have some take up. It is uber smooth. I mean, it really is, and it gets to a nice defined wall. And there's your break coming in under 5 pounds, about 4.8 pounds or so. That's absolutely fantastic. And then in terms of the reset, the reset's right there, and we're back out to the start. It's a short reset as well. It's audible, it's tactile, all the things that I like to see out of a trigger. So we'll do this again. We've got our take up, and we've got our break, our reset, and a follow-up shot. It's fantastic. Now I say all of this with one significant caveat. You see that point back there that's part of the safety lever, it disappears and then you're supposed to be able to work the trigger. That's all fine and good, but I'll tell you what, that point is really problematic for me. You guys know I've got really long fingers, so I actually wrap my finger through, as a lot of people do, and that means I catch that. I catch that often, so that's really problematic. So I actually have to take some sandpaper and soften that up just a little bit so it works better. It's not the end of the world, but out of the box, again, that's actually a significant issue for me. So other than that, it's a good trigger out of the box, but it has to have some modifications for me. All right, let's look at the Glock trigger. You guys will notice it's been switched out for the stock Glock trigger system. Everything is completely stock in here now, to be completely fair. So we've got our safety lever once again, and I'll point out the back of the safety here in just a moment to compare it to the P-10. But we do have just a little bit of take-up, although not much. We actually get to a wall a little bit sooner than the P-10. And then our break, and our break's coming in about 5.5, a little bit over 5.5 pounds. So definitely a heavier trigger there. And then we've got our reset. Our reset is right there. It's audible, it's tactile. Now, it's not as short as the P-10, but I actually really like the resets on Glocks. They're so predictable, and if you train to reset, I think these triggers are hard to beat, believe it or not. So once again, we've got our take up to a wall, and there's our break. It's not quite as clean as the P-10, I will say. And there's your reset, and there's your follow-up shot. Definitely doable, no doubt about it. Now, as far as the safety, a couple of things. This does not completely disappear into the face of the trigger, so if you're using the pad of your finger, you're going to notice it after a while. But the back of the safety completely disappears. I have never had an issue running Glock triggers, not once, whether it be aftermarket or stock. So out of the box, I can really run this thing without any modifications or anything like that. That's actually really important to me. So although the Glock trigger probably is not as good as the P-10, functionality for me, it's better. Well, guys, here we are at the end of another If I Could Only Have One, and I have to say, they continue to get harder and harder with every episode. There is a lot to like with the P-10S. First and foremost, it's cut for an optic, so if that's something that's really important to you, this might be a really good option. The sights have gotten better over time. The ergonomics are good, although they could be a little bit better, at least in my hands. And you do have the mag interchangeability, so all told, it's a great package. You even have the accessory rail as well. Now, the Glock 26, of course, it's doing things a little bit different. It's more bare bones, no doubt about that. People oftentimes spend the money to upgrade and that sort of thing, but out of the box, it still has some things going for it. It is uber small. It's almost a pocket gun, which is pretty incredible. Now, it's 10 rounds versus the 12 rounds of the P-10S, but it's also got amazing magazine interchangeability. So again, more bare bones, but it's still doing things exactly the way it's designed to do it. In terms of price, they're actually kind of a wash, and here's why. Right now you can find a Gen 4 26 for around $450, sometimes a little bit lower than that, and the street price on the P10S is around $525, $550, believe it or not. Now it's new, and that price will come down a little bit, but most people build in the price of a Glock with sight, so both coming in around $550. Again, I call that a wash. Your mileage may vary there. And let's not forget about aftermarket support. Now, I won't go into a long diatribe about that, but Glock is the king, and it will take a long time for CZ or basically anyone to really catch up with that. With all that being said, guys, the thing that this comes down to is shootability, because both of these are designed to be carry guns. I have some problems with the CZ, one of which are the ergonomics. It's just not quite as comfortable for me. I think I'll work up to that, but right now it's not. The other thing, and far more critical, is that safety lever. Because of my style of shooting, I get caught on that a lot, and that's a big, big problem. I don't have that issue with the Glock. Aside from that, though, I simply shoot the Glock better. I've got more trigger time, to be fair, but I still shoot it better. And in a situation, I want the best shooting gun I can possibly have. So, guys, if I could only have one, yes, it would be the Gen 4 Glock 26. Now, I'm really curious to know what you guys have to say about that. If you agree or disagree, be sure to sound off down below. I'm sure there will be some people that disagree with me, no doubt about that, but I'm excited to talk with you guys regardless. So, otherwise, thanks so much for joining me, and I will see you next time.